The narrative commences in absolute, breathless silence. The heavy tension continues to build within the unwritten void before the impending chaos. A desperate, harrowing cry for someone to die violently shatters the surrounding silence. The sudden visual intensity fades out, forcefully transitioning the scene into a stark memory. One day earlier, the lavish foreign Noble Academy graduation party venue brims with bright anticipation. A cheerful voice rings out across the crowded hall, heartily congratulating everyone on their graduation. Prince Richard of the Foreign Kingdom proudly addresses the swooning crowd, passionately praising all those who will support their great nation. Cruel whispers suddenly erupt as shallow onlookers mercilessly mock a girl's embarrassing, old-fashioned dress. The mean-spirited noble guests snicker viciously, aggressively questioning why she even attended in a poorly fitted, second-hand gown. They ruthlessly hurl insults at her gaudy, rose-red hair, calling her strange appearance undeniably creepy. Standing in silent isolation, Count's daughter Sharon Zuldork endures the heavy judgment of her inscrutable black eyes. The relentless gossip tears into Sharon, brutally mocking her lack of a fiancé, family presence, or proper party attire. The sneering crowd dismisses her entirely, aggressively branding her as the shameless and expected burden of the Zuldork family. Sharon wistfully recalls a legendary era when divine beasts walked the world, granting humanity their protective blessings to rule. In the Foreign Kingdom, possessing innate magic remains the absolute proof of noble blood and societal standing. Tragically, Sharon reflects on the harsh, inescapable reality that she was born entirely devoid of magic. Her painful alienation began early, sparked by her distinct hair color that starkly contrasted with everyone else in her family. Her father's dark suspicions of her mother's infidelity ultimately resulted in Sharon being utterly despised by all. Her incredibly gaudy, rose-red hair served as a constant, glaring reminder of her wretched outcast status. Accepting her painful label as the Zuldork family burden, Sharon vividly remembers the day everything began to shift. A rare voice of pure kindness cut through the cruelty, acknowledging Sharon's earnest efforts despite completely lacking magical talent. Leona courageously stepped forward from the shadows of harsh judgment, becoming the very first person to truly reach out and befriend her. Blessed with exceptional wind magic, Leona generously used her incredible talents to help Sharon with spells time and again. To the incredibly lonely outcast Sharon, Leona shone brilliantly as the first gentle light to ever reach her in the darkness. Despite Leona's cruel friends fiercely hating Sharon and demanding she keep her distance, she persevered for her friend. Sharon was deeply moved to her core when Leona surprisingly gifted her a breathtakingly beautiful hair ornament. Declaring them absolute best friends, Leona warmly insisted that Sharon wear the precious ornament to the upcoming graduation party. Clinging desperately to Leona's promise, Sharon anxiously worked up the courage to attend and now eagerly scans the hall for her. A sudden, massive wave of awe sweeps over the murmuring crowd as a shifting presence commands attention. The grand doors seemingly burst wide open as a breathtaking, undeniable aura overtakes the magnificent room. Gasps immediately erupt as His Highness the Prince makes a stunning entrance, proudly escorting his beautiful fiancée, Duke's daughter Leona Sendio. Sharon's heart throbs violently as the enamored crowd gushes over how absolutely perfect Leona and the prince look standing together. Prince Richard proudly announces their momentous, joy-filled decision to marry following Leona's graduation. The ecstatic crowd immediately erupts into deafening cheers and heartfelt congratulations for the shining royal couple. Realizing this beautiful announcement was the reason she was invited, Sharon silently and happily sends her warmest congratulations to Leona. The joyful atmosphere instantly shatters into pieces as the prince sternly declares a grave matter must now be condemned. Prince Richard's booming, furious voice tears through the dead silence, aggressively calling out Sharon Zuldork's name. Startled by the incredibly sudden hostility, Sharon glances up in complete, bewildering shock at the unexpected call. The entire magnificent hall gasps in unison as a terrifying, heavy tension utterly suffocates the terrified room. The prince devastatingly accuses a completely stunned Sharon of being a wicked villainess who ruthlessly attempted to assassinate his fiancée. Prince Richard points accusingly at the crowd, fiercely vowing to expose Sharon's crimes right here and now. Utterly bewildered, Sharon quietly questions the villainous label as the surrounding noble crowd murmurs in shock. A ruthless guard forcefully shoves Sharon to the ground with a heavy thud, aggressively demanding she kneel before His Majesty. Rushing forward in a sudden panic, Leona desperately begs the royal guards not to hurt her dear friend. Reaching out with deep, visible concern, Leona frantically asks if Sharon is all right despite the incredibly rough treatment. Prince Richard gently intervenes, praising Leona's immense kindness while firmly insisting she step back and leave this to him. With absolute cold authority, the prince turns his piercing, hateful glare back toward the kneeling Sharon Zuldork. He furiously demands to know how she even dares to shamelessly show her face at their prestigious graduation party. Richard aggressively accuses her, violently shouting and asking if she has any idea how much she has made poor Leona suffer. Gasping in sheer confusion, Sharon stares blankly as she hopelessly struggles to comprehend the intense, sudden accusations. The prince claims Leona's friends reported Sharon was bitterly jealous, constantly spreading vicious rumors and stealing her precious belongings. Struck with sudden, gripping panic, Sharon desperately asks what in the world he is talking about. She frantically denies the wild allegations, insisting with a trembling voice that she absolutely never committed any such acts. Richard glares down at her with absolute disgust, ruthlessly asking if she truly intends to keep playing the innocent victim. He suddenly drops a massive bombshell, screaming that she sent Leona a poisoned cake in a vile attempt to kill her. The entire crowd instantly erupts into horrified murmurs over the attempted murder while a terrified Leona visibly cowers. The prince confidently declares they possess undeniable proof, revealing the deadly package was explicitly listed under Sharon's name. He further seals her grim fate by announcing they actually found a distinct strand of rose-red hair hidden inside the cake. Trembling weakly, Leona stammers that Sharon is her dear friend and surely there has been some terrible, massive mistake. Pleading desperately for her life, Sharon cries out to Leona and fiercely swears she never sent any poison cake. Richard viciously cuts her off, roaring that no one else possesses rose-red hair and demanding she finally admit her heinous crime. Sharon winces in sheer physical and emotional agony, utterly overwhelmed and paralyzed by the relentless verbal assault. Suddenly, a shiny object violently tumbles from Sharon's person, immediately catching the furious prince's sharp attention. Richard aggressively snatches the fallen hair ornament, shockingly identifying it as the precious heirloom Leona previously claimed she had lost. As Sharon desperately tries to explain it was a beautiful gift from Leona, the furious prince commands absolute silence. He loudly shames her in front of everyone, declaring this pathetic thievery is exactly the sort of desperate scheme a magicless person would attempt. The noble crowd viciously turns on her, disgustedly murmuring and branding her a filthy, despicable thief who merely used Leona. The onlookers hypocritically praise poor Leona for still attempting to defend the very person who callously tried to murder her. They loudly elevate Leona to the flawless status of a true saint, whispering that her boundless mercy makes her worthy of becoming their future queen. Staring at the ground in absolute, crushing despair, Sharon completely breaks inside as the entire world viciously turns against her. Sensing the crowd's unified, blazing hatred, the prince firmly decides enough is enough and strictly prepares to pass his final judgment. Leona feebly attempts to interject one last time, weakly calling out for the raging prince to wait just a moment. She insists with large tears welling in her eyes that there is simply no way Sharon would ever do such a horrific thing. Completely ignoring his fiancée's gentle pleas, Richard firmly condemns Sharon's countless, heinous acts as absolutely unforgivable. With a booming, authoritative voice, he officially sentences the vile villainess to immediate, permanent exile from the entire country. Sharon gasps softly as the devastating weight of the ultimate, inescapable punishment finally crushes her very soul. Sitting alone in absolute cold isolation, she sadly reflects that her miserable life truly never had any real hope to begin with. Trapped within a dark, dreary cell, she aimlessly wonders exactly how long it has been since she was first imprisoned. The heavy silence is suddenly broken when a guard casually tosses a letter from her estranged family into the cramped cell. Rustling the stark white paper, she slowly reaches out in the darkness to carefully read the contents of the mysterious family letter. The crushing weight of absolute disownment officially severs Sharon from her former noble life. A solitary, melancholic tear drips silently into the oppressive void of her bleak despair. Completely abandoned with no one to see her off, she coldly faces her immediate exile from the country. A ruthless guard violently shoves her forward, aggressively screaming at her to get into the transport already. The heavy wooden carriage looms menacingly, serving as the grim vessel meant to carry criminals away. The stern guard strictly warns her not to attempt escape from the unmanned criminal transport carriage. He clearly details how the magically transported carriage will trigger a massive alarm if she disappears before reaching the cruiser kingdom. He callously adds that many exiles brutally perish along the perilous route, relentlessly attacked by ravenous monsters in the demon forest. Trembling at the terrifying prospect, Sharon nervously reflects on the infamous horrors lurking within the demon forest. Unexpected footsteps suddenly break the heavy tension, signaling a surprising approach toward the condemned carriage. A familiar voice commands the armored guards to wait, temporarily halting the impending departure. The obedient guards immediately step back, respectfully allowing the mysterious visitor a private moment to say their farewells. Peering out with desperate hope, Sharon wonders if her only true ally has finally come to save her. Her sorrowful eyes widen in pure astonishment as she recognizes Leona standing right outside the transport. Leona softly claims she came strictly because there is something important she desperately needs to tell Sharon. The supposed saint suddenly breaks character, letting out a sinister, mocking chuckle that shatters the gloomy atmosphere. With a twisted smile, Leona mockingly thanks Sharon for thoroughly entertaining her at the lavish graduation party. Utterly bewildered by the sudden cruelty, Sharon blanks in pure shock and questions what she means. Leona gleefully reveals that using Sharon allowed her to put on an absolutely wonderful condemnation show for the nobles. Desperately trying to process the horrifying truth, Sharon agonizingly struggles to understand her former friend's dark betrayal. When Sharon weakly calls her name, Leona viciously snaps, commanding her not to speak with such disgusting familiarity. The wicked noblewoman ruthlessly declares that even calling them friends is absolutely revolting to her. Sharon physically recoils from the sharp venom in Leona's voice, her fragile heart completely shattered by the monstrous revelation. Leona coldly admits she only acted kindly toward the magicless nuisance simply to secure her position as His Highness's fiancée. She arrogantly boasts that utilizing Sharon successfully manipulated the prince and sent her saintly reputation soaring. Basking in her dark victory, Leona triumphantly declares her lifelong dream of becoming queen will finally come true. With her royal status fully secured, Leona brutally states that the villainous Sharon is simply no longer needed. She cruelly mocks that even if Sharon miraculously reaches her destination, a magicless girl could never survive the demon forest. Leona coldly seals her former friend's grim fate, declaring that absolute death is the only outcome for the exiled. Trembling in utter devastation, Sharon quietly denies the agonizing reality collapsing entirely around her. She heartbreakingly realizes that every single moment of her precious friendship was just a twisted manipulation by Leona. The heavy carriage violently jolts forward, rattling noisily as it begins rolling toward the deadly frontier. Sinking completely into dark despair, Sharon solemnly accepts that absolutely no one in the world ever needed her. She hopelessly resigns herself to a brutally lonely death, fully expecting to be torn apart by monsters in the demon forest. A suffocating veil of absolute darkness envelopes the carriage interior, matching the empty void within her crushed soul. Suddenly, a strange, distinct voice fiercely pierces the silence, demanding to know if this is really how she wants it to end. Startled, Sharon gazes down in sheer disbelief at a tiny, pure white bird perched directly in front of her. She frantically questions her own sanity, heavily doubting that a small bird could actually be speaking to her. Glancing around the dark confines, she urgently wonders if she truly just heard a voice calling out from the shadows. The mysterious avian entity provocatively challenges her shattered spirit, firmly asking if she is genuinely fine with being used and dying. Awakening with a sudden, sharp gasp, Sharon's senses violently snap back to reality in the oppressive darkness. A strange, ethereal shimmering effect envelopes the heavy, terrifying void of her grim, enclosed surroundings. Absolute, suffocating silence forcefully stretches out as she frantically struggles to process her incredibly desperate situation. Trembling in profound, undeniable terror, she weakly whispers her desperate, tearful plea against her impending doom. A sudden, violent jolt rocks her fragile body entirely, instantly accompanied by a sharp gasp of sheer agony. Searing, intense pain brutally tears through her form as she fiercely screams that her very body is burning. Refusing to surrender to the endless darkness, she fiercely cries out that she absolutely does not want to die like this. Agonized, breathless groans completely escape her trembling lips as the immense, fiery suffering utterly overwhelms her. Suddenly, a profound, bizarre sense of absolute confusion completely replaces her agonizing, excruciating pain. Shocked by the miraculous transition, She realizes her formerly freezing, aching body now feels incredibly warm and unbelievably light. Staring in sheer, mind-bending disbelief, she realizes her familiar human hands have somehow miraculously transformed into feathered wings. A sudden, magical poof loudly echoes in the dark carriage as her incredible, impossible physical transformation fully manifests. Utterly astounded by her stunning new form, she frantically realizes she has somehow magically turned into a tiny bird. Overwhelmed by absolute, crushing panic, she frantically denies the impossible, bird-shifting reality violently crashing down upon her. A piercing, magical alarm suddenly shrieks through the tense air, loudly signaling that the kingdom believes the condemned prisoner has escaped. Driven by pure, unadulterated survival instinct, she desperately realizes she must rapidly flee before the furious royal guards arrive. Startled by a sudden, incredibly unexpected physical complication, she lets out a sharp, wildly confused chirp. Flapping her tiny new wings with absolutely frantic desperation, she helplessly tumbles back to the cold, unforgiving ground. Crushed by absolute frustration, she realizes that despite miraculously possessing actual wings, she possesses zero knowledge of how to fly. Refusing to just sit and wait for capture, she fiercely resolves to at least frantically run away from the heavily monitored carriage. Stumbling blindly through the thick, oppressive darkness, she frantically realizes she cannot see absolutely anything in her terrifying surroundings. Panting heavily in sheer, overwhelming exhaustion, she desperately pauses to frantically question where on earth she has just run to. Her tiny, avian heart utterly skips a beat as a terrifying, grotesque monster suddenly looms directly in her escape path. Struck by absolute, paralyzing dread, she realizes she has accidentally wandered deep into the deadly, heavily feared demon forest. A shrill, utterly terrified shriek violently erupts from her tiny beak as the massive, drooling beast aggressively lunges forward. The colossal, nightmarish monster aggressively charges her, violently shaking the dark forest floor with its immense, deadly weight. Completely paralyzed by the overwhelming terror, she hopelessly accepts that her miraculously extended life is already completely done for. A sudden, massive, and incredibly brutal impact violently interrupts the monster's deadly, rapidly incoming attack. Staring in complete, bewildered shock, she watches deadly, glowing ice arrows violently impale the terrifying, towering beast. The colossal monster wildly thrashes in horrific agony, unleashing a deafening, piercing screech as the freezing magic rapidly destroys it. Desperately commanding her tiny legs to frantically run, she tragically realizes she is completely frozen in pure, unadulterated terror. Trembling violently as the massive beast begins to forcefully collapse directly above her, she frantically wonders what to do. Bracing for the inevitable crushing impact of the beast, she fiercely squeezes her eyes shut and screams that she is dying too. Slowly fluttering her tiny eyes open, she incredibly awakens to a completely unfamiliar, surprisingly calm surrounding environment. Letting out a soft, highly confused chirp, she wearily scans the completely unknown area and urgently wonders where she is. A massive jolt of absolute shock violently electrifies her tiny body as sudden, mind-blowing realization finally sets in. Overjoyed and incredibly bewildered, she frantically celebrates the unbelievable, miraculous fact that she is somehow miraculously still alive. Feeling the sharp, undeniable sting of her wound, she solidly confirms her impossible transformation into a tiny bird is absolutely real. Her scattered memories violently rush back, vividly recalling the horrifying moment she thought the charging monster would brutally end her. She vividly recalls the monstrous beast being violently struck down by freezing magic, utterly stunned by the mysterious savior standing before her. Staring in pure terror, Sharon realizes someone even scarier than the monster is approaching. A dark, imposing figure steps silently from the shadowy depths of the dense forest. Trembling violently, the tiny bird panics as the terrifying man suddenly appears right before her. Driven by sheer survival instinct, Sharon frantically commands her tiny, injured body to run away. Her desperate escape abruptly halts as she trips over her wings, letting out a sharp cry of pain. Muttering about what a total pain this is, the imposing figure reaches down toward her. A massive, gloved hand suddenly engulfs her fragile avian body with inescapable firmness. Overwhelmed by absolute dread, Sharon unleashes a deafening, piercing shriek of pure terror. A sudden, polite voice unexpectedly interrupts the tense moment from the dark background. Relieved to hear another human, Sharon sheds tears of hope that someone might save her. With pleading, tear-filled eyes, the tiny bird silently begs the newcomer for immediate help. Her fragile hope shatters instantly as she notices the terrifying man aggressively glaring at her. The subordinate formally addresses the scary man as Zek-sama, announcing tonight's menu features fried chicken. A horrifying realization strikes Sharon as she equates chicken to bird, fearing she is dinner. Flapping her tiny wings wildly, she fiercely protests and struggles against Zek's firm grip. Frantically attempting to escape, she desperately hopes they realize she would not taste good at all. Her desperate eyes suddenly lock onto the expansive, clear sky visible through a nearby window. Mustering all her remaining strength, the terrified bird boldly leaps toward the promising escape route. Her daring flight ends abruptly with a brutal, solid thud against the unforgiving glass pane. Exhausted and dizzy from the hard impact, Sharon helplessly collapses into complete, dark unconsciousness. Slowly fluttering her eyes open, she awakens to Zek's calmly observing her return to consciousness. Gently urging her not to push herself, he reveals he has already carefully treated her injuries. The imposing man softly breaks the quiet tension, formally introducing himself as Zex Harbujin. Zex suddenly pauses with an awkward expression, blankly wondering why he just introduced himself to a bird. Staring at her fresh bandages, Sharon slowly realizes her terrifying rescuer never planned to eat her. Sighing in relief, she humorously notes her tiny body barely has any meat on it anyway. Her initial fear completely fades as she remembers Zex brutally striking down the monster to save her. Glancing around the beautifully decorated room, she curiously wonders if this is his private residence. Instructing her to wait, Zex kindly mentions she definitely needs some food to regain her strength. Hearing the mention of food, Sharon's tiny stomach rumbles as she realizes she is utterly starving. Zex returns and casually presents a horrifying meal of squirming bugs, causing Sharon to scream internally. Shaking her tiny head violently, she completely rejects the disgusting insects with sheer, unadulterated revulsion. Flapping wildly and pecking at the air, she desperately tries to convey she is actually human. Her frantic protests suddenly cease as she bitterly remembers a tiny bird cannot actually speak. Looking closely, Sharon suddenly notices fresh, dark blood seeping heavily through a torn hole in Zex's shirt. She vividly recalls his daring rescue against the monster, realizing he sustained that gruesome injury saving her. Filled with overwhelming guilt, the tiny bird droops her head sadly and lets out a sorrowful chirp. Noticing her miserable gaze, Zex gently asks if the little bird is actually worried about his bleeding wound. Brushing off the intense pain, he calmly claims the injury is absolutely nothing compared to a monster's attack. Without hesitation, Zex firmly grips his torn shirt and aggressively pulls it off to reveal his bare chest. Startling awake, the tiny bird twitches in sudden surprise. A large, calloused hand gently and rhythmically strokes her small, fragile head. Basking in the soothing warmth, she silently wonders how long it has been since someone patted her so affectionately. She gazes up in absolute awe, captivated by the unexpected kindness radiating from this towering figure. Suddenly, an imposing subordinate interrupts the quiet moment and briskly enters the room. Terrified by the newcomer's fierce face, the little bird tumbles backward in sheer panic while the man asks about the creature found in the forest. The gentle giant scolds Grek for frightening her, though Grek dryly notes their faces are equally intimidating. Grek formally reports that the expected exile from the Fonran kingdom has yet to arrive. The giant casually muses about a potential transport accident, dismissing the issue since the exile hasn't crossed their border. He firmly adds that they only care if the criminal illegally enters the Cruzal kingdom to escape justice. Shock paralyzes the bird as she realizes they are talking about her and that she is currently trapped in the Cruzal kingdom. She recalls that Cruzal is a massive nation bordering Fonran, plagued by frequent monster attacks from the sprawling demon forest. Academy lessons flood her mind, detailing how Margrave Harbujin defends the entire nation against the horrific monsters of the forest. A terrifying realization strikes her like lightning as she remembers the giant introducing himself as Zex Harbujin. Panic sets in as she realizes she is resting in the very hands of House Harbujin, the renowned clan of fierce monster slayers. Trembling with dread, she knows she won't survive if they discover she is the criminal who illegally crossed their border. Trapped in her avian form with a wildly beating heart, she desperately resolves to escape before her true identity is exposed. Her mental escape plan abruptly halts as Zex leans in with a suspicious hum, locking his intense gaze onto her. Freezing under his heavy scrutiny, she sweats nervously while Grek asks his lord what is wrong. Zex's piercing stare bores directly into her tiny, trembling soul. Her heart pounds furiously as sheer terror mounts, fearing the monster slayer has already seen through her disguise. To her utter disbelief, Zex simply holds out a squirming bug and asks why she won't eat insects. Desperately chanting internally that she must act like a real bird, she stares at the gross, wriggling grub. Unable to stomach the disgusting insect, she recoils in absolute defeat. Noticing her blatant disgust, Zex gently sets down a small plate of alternative food. A glorious spread of human-friendly food gleams before her, instantly wiping away her despair. Starving and relieved, she ravenously devours the delicious meal without a second thought. Cheeks stuffed to the brim, she completely melts into pure bliss over the incredible flavor. Zex watches her frantic eating with mild amusement and deep fascination. He murmurs that despite his familiarity with all local creatures, he has never seen a bird quite like her. Grek leans in closely, wondering aloud if this peculiar little creature is an entirely undiscovered new species. Zex gently touches her wing, admiring the striking rose-red pattern adorning her delicate feathers. With genuine warmth in his deep voice, the fierce monster slayer calls her beautiful. Stunned by the completely unexpected compliment, she freezes mid-chew. Zex smiles softly, expressing his earnest desire to see her fully spread those magnificent wings someday. Flushing deeply under her feathers, she frantically reminds herself to calm down because he is only praising a bird. A bittersweet wave of emotion washes over her as she realizes her feathers match the exact hair color her own family despised. Tears prick her eyes as the profound realization hits that this is the first time anyone has ever called her true color beautiful. With a full belly and a comforted heart, a heavy wave of drowsiness finally overtakes her small, exhausted body. Noticing her drooping eyes, Zex smiles gently and warmly asks if she is completely satisfied. The silent room buzzes with an unspoken, lingering tension. Gently patting the little bird, Zex praises her as a good girl. Panic sets in as the bird desperately pretends to sleep, completely unsure of what expression she is supposed to make. The towering man announces he is leaving her in the maid's care so he can finish the rest of his work. A heavy sigh escapes the bird as the door clicks shut. Suddenly, a polite knock interrupts the quiet as someone excuses themselves to enter the room. Recognizing the familiar face from earlier, the bird watches as Era Pori formally introduces herself as the lady-in-waiting. Era dramatically pledges to care for the esteemed little bird with absolutely everything she has. Sensing a sudden shift in the atmosphere, the bird nervously realizes something seems deeply off. A strange, intense aura emanates from the heavily breathing maid as she creeps closer. Era's eyes widen with wild obsession as she fixates entirely on the fluffy creature. Startled, the bird freezes completely under the maid's overwhelming and hungry gaze. Without warning, Era's hands eagerly close in on the helpless little captive. The bird stares wide-eyed as the terrifyingly affectionate maid looms over her. A panicked peep escapes the bird as she is suddenly snatched up by the aggressive hands. Squished in a tight embrace, the bird shrieks in protest while Era aggressively swoons over her incredible fluffiness. Era passionately snuggles the poor creature, confessing she had been holding back her intense desires for far too long. Cradling the struggling bird, the maid tearfully vows to protect the poor, injured creature from all terrifying monsters. Exhausted from the overwhelming affection, the limp bird is gently placed inside a secure enclosure. Era sternly instructs her to rest quietly so she does not accidentally hurt herself inside. With a sharp click, the heavy metal lock secures the cage tightly shut. Smiling deeply, Era promises to pet her even more once her injuries fully heal. Left entirely alone in the sudden silence, the trapped bird stares blankly ahead. Releasing a heavy sigh, she despairs over her inescapable situation and wonders what she is supposed to do now. She glares bitterly at the cold, unforgiving iron bars caging her in. Though it has a soft bed and feels warm unlike a standard prison cell, the grim reality deeply haunts her. A profound sense of dread washes over her as she accepts she is still entirely trapped all the same. Sighing heavily again, she questions the universe about why she was magically forced into the body of a little bird. She mentally confirms that her strange transformation is definitely the direct result of some kind of magic. Realizing that magic inevitably fades over time, she resolves to escape the mansion before her temporary bird form completely expires. However, an overwhelming sense of lost direction hits her as she wonders where she even is right now. A crushing wave of loneliness fills her heart as she tragically concludes that a true place for her does not exist anywhere in the world. Meanwhile, a deeply contemplative Zex sits quietly elsewhere, lost in his own intense thoughts. He ponders endlessly about the fascinating nature of that enchanting little bird. Vivid memories of the bird's delicate, brightly colored form flash clearly across his rugged mind. He suddenly grips his face, completely overwhelmed by the realization that the tiny creature was simply too cute. He recalls how the bird seemed to genuinely apologize for pecking him earlier in the day. Reflecting on her vivid expressions, he realizes she showed him profound emotion instead of just plain fear. Blushing fiercely, Zex seriously questions the universe if it is even okay for something so adorable to exist. Determined and completely smitten, he firmly answers his own question by declaring that it is absolutely fine. Recalling his tragic past, Zex laments that animals always instinctively flee from his terrifying presence despite his best efforts. He grimly acknowledges that only bloodthirsty monsters ever dare to approach his monstrous, battle-hardened stature. Yet today proved entirely different when he unexpectedly discovered a tiny, sizzling bird resting in the frozen woods. He quietly reflects on that fateful, life-altering encounter with the fragile, beautiful creature. Shock violently ripples through the estate as the stunned servants gasp at the sight of their fearsome lord protecting a tiny bird. Bewildered whispers erupt among the buzzing staff, incredibly shocked by his sudden affection despite his rumored hatred for animals. Zex sternly commands the overly eager, squealing servants to quiet down immediately because the precious bird is severely injured. Releasing a heavy sigh, he feels deeply amused by how wildly lively the usually grim mansion has instantly become. He warmly admits that this chaotic, joyful uproar is entirely because the little bird is overwhelmingly adorable. A profound, aching desire to gently stroke the mesmerizing creature completely consumes his guarded heart. However, a dark fear paralyzes him as he stares at his massive hands, terrified his immense strength would only crush her. He mournfully longs to physically embrace the radiant, comforting warmth of the precious life resting quietly nearby. Remembering the countless terrified beasts of his lonely past, he desperately wonders if this unique creature will be different. He fiercely hopes that the little bird will calmly reflect his true, gentle self within her round, innocent eyes. Breaking away from his deep thoughts, Zex realizes the precious, nameless bird desperately needs a proper title. He logically reasons that he absolutely requires a fitting name to call her while she remains under his protection. Gazing softly into the quiet room, he heavily searches his mind for the absolute perfect, meaningful name. Recalling her pristine feathers and the frozen forest where they met, pure inspiration violently strikes his mind. With firm, unwavering resolution, he officially bestows the beautiful, simple name, Sue, upon the tiny, rescued bird. Just as he warmly wonders if she will like the new name, a sudden knock loudly shatters the quiet peace of his office. Grek abruptly enters the grand room, formally announcing his arrival to deliver a mandatory status report. Before Grek can even begin his official briefing, an anxious Zex immediately demands a crucial update on the little bird. Flustered by the sudden question, Grek accidentally blurts out that she is incredibly fluffy before frantically correcting his tone. Regaining his rigid composure, Grek officially reports that the bird is resting quietly in her secure cage. Zex solemnly admits that strictly confining her feels incredibly cruel, but accepts it as a tragic necessity for her safety. Expressing his sincere gratitude, the towering lord firmly orders the staff to continue their dedicated care for the little bird. Era, the wildly enthusiastic maid, silently beams with absolute, uncontainable joy at the lord's commanding request. With explosive, unrestrained enthusiasm, Era brightly and loudly accepts the incredibly important avian assignment. Catching a fleeting, terrifyingly intense smile on the eager maid's face, Zex momentarily questions his own sanity. A sudden, creeping sense of dread strongly urges the worried lord to turn back and immediately check on the helpless bird. Without warning, a vicious, blinding spike of agonizing pain violently rips through his massive, battle-scarred chest. Gritting his teeth in sheer torment, Zex painfully clutches his pounding heart as his immense strength suddenly fades. A sharp, guttural groan completely escapes his trembling lips as the overwhelming agony violently forces him down to his knees. He horrifically realizes that the lethal, dark curse is rapidly spreading through his veins, forcing him to face imminent death. Defying his cruel, impending fate, his fierce eyes blaze with unbroken resolve as he furiously declares he cannot die just yet. Clinging to a desperate sliver of hope, his frantic mind immediately flashes back to the fragile little bird he just saved. He intensely remembers the shocking surge of mysterious power that flooded his wounded soul the very second he touched her. A powerful premonition completely convinces him that this tiny creature is the only key to entirely shattering his cursed destiny. Meanwhile, the newly named bird securely rests in her cage, unaware of the immense burden placed upon her small wings. Fighting through the blinding pain, Zex desperately whispers her new name, powerfully anchoring his fading life to her existence. Resting quietly in her soft enclosure, the tiny white bird sleeps peacefully in the gentle morning light. Suddenly, a sharp, unspoken realization violently stirs her completely awake. The faint, lingering echo of the word, snow, drifts mysteriously through her groggy, confused mind. She blearily recalls being violently attacked by a terrifying monster before being whisked away to this completely unfamiliar domain. A warm, comforting memory instantly surfaces of the imposing giant firmly promising to protect her from all harm. Without warning, a sharp, rhythmic tapping noise quickly draws her full attention straight toward the nearby window. Blinking in sheer confusion, she listens as a loud, obnoxious voice aggressively demands her to wake up immediately. Glancing frantically around the quiet room in absolute bewilderment, she desperately searches for the mysterious, invisible speaker. She jumps in sudden terror as a tiny, arrogant bird furiously pecks the glass, angrily ordering her not to ignore him. Utter shock completely paralyzes her as she abruptly realizes she can perfectly understand the chirping creature's distinct language. She grimly remembers easily understanding another white bird's desperate, tragic warnings right before it was brutally killed. The noisy, impatient intruder violently interrupts her dark thoughts, angrily shouting to grab her full, undivided attention. The brash little bird wildly mocks her for getting caught while she meekly apologizes for being so easily startled. Leaning in closely, the arrogant visitor bluntly warns her that the towering man is horribly cursed and heavily demands she stay far away from him. Before she can furiously chirp back a single question, the tiny messenger panics at a sudden noise and frantically flies away. The heavy wooden door suddenly creaks open as Zex calmly steps into the quiet, sunlit room. Noticing her frantically ruffled feathers, the gentle giant softly asks if something is deeply troubling his precious ward. Staring intensely at her towering savior, she heavily questions the strange bird's terrifying warning about his supposedly dark curse. Despite his deeply intimidating, battle-scarred appearance, she firmly realizes he does not feel remotely dangerous or evil to her. She cautiously wonders if his supposed curse is highly contagious and if that is the real reason she was warned to stay completely away. Completely lost in her own deep thoughts, she intensely ponders what the cryptic, terrifying warning truly meant for her safety. Her deep train of thought instantly shatters as Zex violently blushes, staring at her with an overwhelmingly intense adoration. Gripping his face in utter defeat, the massive warrior struggles desperately to contain his overflowing, agonizing affection for her. Tilting her tiny head in sheer confusion, she closely watches his dramatic internal battle with deep, unwavering bewilderment. He desperately begs her to stop staring so adorably, nervously justifying that the sturdy iron cage is absolutely necessary for her ultimate protection. Completely defeated by her devastating cuteness, he violently groans and ultimately surrenders to her innocent, wide-eyed gaze. Her tiny heart soars with pure joy as he gently unlocks the heavy cage, fully agreeing to let her out for just a little while. Confidently perching onto his massive, calloused finger, she solidly reassures herself that she is perfectly safe near his immense presence. A sudden, unexpected realization warmly sparks between them as they share a quiet, beautifully tender moment of absolute trust. Breaking the peaceful silence, Zex gently suggests they head out immediately to grab a delicious, satisfying meal together. Carrying her carefully through the grand halls, they steadily make their way directly toward the bustling, aromatic mansion kitchen. Spotting a fully roasted bird, utter panic violently seizes her tiny heart as she horrifyingly assumes she is next on the menu. The head chef respectfully greets the imposing lord, officially presenting a specially prepared, elegant dish meant entirely for the little bird. To her immense, overwhelming relief, the intimidating chef kindly reveals a pristine plate of freshly harvested, brightly colored apples. Overjoyed by the sweet feast, she ravenously devours the crisp fruit while silently thanking them for the absolutely incredible meal. Watching her eat enthusiastically, Zex warmly observes aloud that his precious Snow absolutely loves eating sweet fruit. He fondly explains that he officially named her Snow because her brilliant white feathers perfectly matched the freezing winter day he found her. Completely stunned by his beautiful, heartfelt gesture, she tearfully realizes he purposefully gave her a truly precious, meaningful name. Bitter memories violently resurface of her cruel family always treating her like a nameless burden, leaving her completely unloved and completely alone. Pushing away her dark, tragic past, her tiny heart fully melts as Zex gently asks if she genuinely likes her beautiful new name. Deeply moved by her beautiful new name, Snow silently reflects that this is the first time anyone has ever called her so affectionately. Despite her overwhelming happiness, the heavy guilt of constantly deceiving him about her true identity violently crushes her fragile heart. Eager to forge a bond, Zex gently announces he will personally give Snow a grand, extensive tour of his sprawling mansion. Nodding enthusiastically to his offer, Snow secretly resolves to flawlessly memorize the intricate layout for her inevitable escape. Stepping into a vast, dimly lit corridor, Zex formally introduces the grand gallery proudly displaying the imposing portraits of his formidable ancestors. Shock violently grips Snow's tiny heart as she horrifyingly realizes every single ancestor possesses a terrifying, deeply intimidating visage. Scanning the dark, imposing walls, her tiny eyes suddenly lock onto a mysterious, solemn portrait dominating the silent space. Staring intently at the grim imagery, she immediately deduces that a dark, tragic event must have permanently stained this proud family's history. Moving further down the shadowy hall, she curiously spots a special collection of paintings specifically depicting Zex himself. Inspecting the artwork closely, she realizes with profound confusion that all his portraits solely showcase him as a very young boy. Abruptly shifting the somber mood, Zex cheerfully declares he will now show her the vibrant, sprawling garden directly outside. A sudden, explosive jolt of pure adrenaline floods her tiny body as she realizes she is finally heading into the open outdoors. Desperation violently blazing in her mind, she decides she has absolutely no choice but to seize this perfect opportunity to flee. Gathering all her remaining strength, the fiercely determined little bird violently leaps directly from his massive, protective hands. Tragically, her severely injured wings completely fail her, sending her plummeting straight into the soft, yielding grass below. Tumbling helplessly through the thick blades of grass, her fluffy white body bounces painfully to a pathetic, muddy halt. Panicking at her sudden, terrifying fall, a deeply alarmed Zex lunges forward and frantically shouts her name in utter desperation. While Zex desperately checks her for new injuries, she pants heavily and bitterly realizes escaping on foot is completely impossible. Utter devastation absolutely crushes her fighting spirit as she tragically wonders why her completely useless wings refuse to take flight. Gazing up with profound, gut-wrenching sorrow, she painfully stares at the boundless, brilliantly blue skies stretching out endlessly above her. Gently scooping her trembling body into his incredibly warm hands, Zex softly warns her not to push her unhealed injuries. A wave of deep, painful empathy washes over his rugged face as he sorrowfully acknowledges that any bird would naturally yearn to soar. Stunned by his raw, heartbreaking display of genuine sadness, Snow stares up at her gentle captor in complete, unwavering bewilderment. Zex quietly gazes down at her fragile form, his fierce, battle-scarred eyes swimming with a profound, unspoken emotional agony. Voice heavily trembling with dark resignation, he solemnly confesses that his monstrous hands have absolutely no right to steal her precious freedom. Gently cradling her close to his massive chest, he desperately and softly pleads for her to just stay. His intense, unbearably lonely gaze pierces her very soul as he heartbreakingly asks if she will remain safely by his side.